Welcome to The Explainer. In this series, we take complex source material and break it down for you. And today, well, we've got a really fascinating one. So today, we are diving deep into the Vampire Bible. This is the text that lays out the entire philosophy for an organization called the Temple of the Vampire. And let me tell you, it does not mess around. It starts right off the bat with this incredibly bold declaration. Okay, so how are we going to tackle this? We're basically going to follow the path an initiate would take. We'll start with their core belief, their creed. Then we'll get into the rituals, how they call on these undead gods. After that, we'll look at the actual art of vampirism as they see it, the mindset you need to adopt. And finally, where this is all supposed to be heading, their version of the apocalypse. All right, first up, the Vampire Creed. This is really the foundation of everything, a complete rethink of who you are and what your place is in the universe. So what are these core tenets? Well, it's all about worshiping yourself, your ego, your life. It's about embracing your inner predator, your animal instincts, but also exalting your rational mind. Survival is the absolute highest law. And here's where it gets really interesting. They say, look, the beliefs around the ritual might just be fantasy, but the magic is real. And death is the ultimate enemy. It's all about self-deification, but with this very pragmatic, almost scientific view of magic. And the text itself kind of gives you a warning label right up front. It says, hey, inside this book, you're going to find facts and you're going to find fantasy, truth and metaphor. You need to be careful and figure out which is which. That just sets such a fascinating tone for the rest of this journey, doesn't it? Okay, so once you've bought into the creed, the philosophy moves from theory into practice. And that means we're talking about ritual. This is how a follower is supposed to actually interact with the supernatural and make all these beliefs, well, real. The main event here is a very specific magical ritual, and its whole purpose? To make contact with beings they call the Undead Gods. Now, these aren't just spooky ghosts. They're defined as vampires who've moved beyond their physical bodies. And making contact with them, this communion, is absolutely essential if you want to transform yourself. And this isn't some vague, mystical, feel the vibes kind of thing. No, the text lays out a super structured 7-step process. You've got entering the chamber, the declaration of self, all the way to leaving again. It's basically a repeatable formula, like a lab experiment, designed to turn a spiritual idea into a practical hands-on technique. So you're doing the ritual. How do you know if it's actually working? Well, you're told to look for some very specific signs. It starts with subtle stuff, a feeling of a cool breeze, a ringing in your ears, that creepy, crawly feeling like a cobweb on your skin. But it can escalate to much more dramatic things, hearing your name called, objects moving on their own, or even seeing one of the undead in a mirror. They give you a whole checklist. Right, so once you've made contact with these undead gods, the training moves to the next level. This is where we get into the absolute core practice, what the text calls the art of vampirism. Now, get this. The text is very clear. This is not about drinking blood. Vampirism, as they define it, is the taking of life force, an unseen energy, from humans to empower yourself. And they frame it in a really detached way. It's not evil, it's just a more refined form of eating. And how do you do it? Well, they break the whole process down into 4 fundamental steps. First, you make contact. This can be with your eyes or through touch. Then, you penetrate. After that, you draw in the life force. And finally, and this is super important, you have to cleanly break contact. It's presented as something instinctual, but also a skill you have to learn. So this really brings us to the core choice that the text lays out for you. It comes from a section called the Book of Dreaming. Are you a sleeper, a regular mortal who's born to die? Twice. First your physical body goes, and then your astral body just starves and fades away. Or are you a dreamer? A vampire who learns to take life force from others to avoid that second death and live forever. Okay, but here's the thing. Mastering all these techniques, it's not enough. The text makes it absolutely clear that to really succeed, you have to adopt a very specific and, let's be honest, for most people, a very difficult mindset. And there it is, right there in black and white. You have to achieve a predator's perspective toward human beings. This means you have to fundamentally change how you see the world. You have to throw out conventional ethics and start seeing other people, well, not as your equals, but as a resource, a herd, a food source. But, and this is such a critical twist, this does not mean you can just go on a destructive rampage. In fact, the text immediately says this is not a license to kill. And it backs that up with some very strict, very practical rules. Check out these rules. Never murder humans, never waste food. It's spelled out. Harming any human gets you kicked out of the temple immediately. You have to stay completely innocent of any crimes in normal society. Why? Because it all comes back to that prime directive. Don't waste your food source. You need to preserve the human herd. And maybe the most fascinating rule of all, you have to cultivate the idea that vampires aren't real. It's called the truth of the lie. So, where is all this heading? This whole system, the creed, the rituals, the predator mindset, it's all building toward a massive, dramatic endgame, a prophecy for the entire world. The text lays out this wild alternative history of the world. It says that way back when, vampires ruled openly as gods. Then there were these great wars, and they had to go into hiding. But here's the kicker. They claim they then created human religion and civilization as a kind of farming project. The whole point of history, according to them, was to domesticate humanity and grow the population for one big event, the final harvest. And that final harvest is described in pretty epic terms. It's this moment when billions of dying humans will release their life energy, not just into nothing, but to a greater cause. The goal isn't just chaos, it's a colossal energy transfer designed to supercharge the undead gods and their followers, pushing them into a whole new state of being. So what happens after this apocalypse? A complete reset. A new world order where the undead gods come out of the shadows and take their thrones. They'll rule openly, and humanity? Well, humanity will finally know its place, serving its rulers. So if you want to be one of the survivors, one of the rulers in this new world, you have to go all in. It requires a complete transformation. You have to adopt that predator mindset, you have to master the vampiric arts, and you have to serve the undead gods. No half measures. And the text makes the stakes incredibly, brutally clear. If you break the rules, if you abuse the power, if you just can't get that predator mindset right, the cup of immortal life is taken away. There's no hell, no punishment, just oblivion. For someone who believes this, being exiled is a death sentence. You just go back to being immortal and you perish. So in the end, whether you see this as a legitimate spiritual path or just an incredibly detailed piece of fiction, it's a fascinating case study. It shows how a complete, modern mythology can be built from scratch. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? It leaves us with this big question about the human search for power, for meaning, and that ultimate desire to somehow, some way, beat death.